Yes, this relates to the email newsletter, which, as I said, we started sending out in 1999. And we do actually archive all of the little science reports on a separate website called the Fact File. We'll give you the details after that. Uh, but this is a couple of examples that were sent in to us from people send us links to various websites and scientific news sites. And someone came across this article about inventions that were quote unquote modeled after nature. And it was on this website with the rather extraordinary name of Mental Floss, uh, and 10 modern inventions modeled after nature. And oh, yes, that's interesting. We often talk about that in creation research. We look at things that, as Craig pointed out, some of the things that have been inspired by the things that are in the natural world. And it was interesting. This article started out, humans frequently adapt technology found in nature to create. Now, notice that word again, just like Craig found there. Can't get away from that word, to create our own inventions, a concept called biomimicry. And this is actually a burgeoning science over the 20 years or so that we've been sending out our newsletter. There's more and more examples of biomimicry, and we've written about quite a few of them. But the first two in this list of 10, and we won't go through all 10, we'll just look at the first two, are two that we wrote about in some of our first email newsletters. And the first one was Velcro. Now, everyone, we live with Velcro all the time these days. It's just everywhere. And of course, Velcro itself is actually a trademark, but the term is. But of course, we all know, very familiar with the sort of hook and loop fastening. And it comes from two words, French words, because it was developed by a Swiss engineer originally, for velvet, right, velour, and hook, which is crochet. And I do a bit of craft work, and I do crochet, and you have to use a hook to actually do crochet. But anyway, Velcro was inspired by this Swiss engineer who was out with his dogs, and he noticed that burrs got attached to his dog's fur, and that inspired him to develop a material that would attach as firmly as burrs stick to dog furs. Now, I know some of you dog owners probably frustrated by that, but anyway, something did come good out of that. And the particular plant he was noticing was this one here. Now, do any of you recognise that?
Is it burdock?
It's burdock. Yes, that's burdock, right. Yes. Yes.
We have a drink over here called Dandelion and Burdock. It's sort of a bit like the Americans' version of Dr. Pepper, and it's traditionally made from dandelion and this plant as well.
Yes. The before it dries out, it looks like this, and but anyway, yes, it has these very distinctive seed pods, and if you look closely at those, they have little hooks on their ends. So if we just go forward again, and back in just before we started sending out our email news, we used to get a magazine called Science News, which is still published, and in an article about burrs not getting stuck to dog fur but to bird feathers, a park ranger described these seed pods as being nature's Velcro. And soon after that, somebody else wrote in, and this was what they wrote in their letter to Science News. A national park service ranger quoted as saying that burdock burrs are, quote unquote, nature's Velcro, and he gives the reference to it in the Science News article. As I understand, the invention of Velcro, the hooks on burrs, were exactly what led to the inventor into his final design. Now, notice that design, cannot get away from that term, design. Right. It is just the opposite. Velcro is man-made burrs. And that was actually a very good comment that we couldn't improve on. So we did actually quote that in our newsletter. And it's still there on our fact file. We've archived that. So back in at the end of 1998 and in 1999, we started sending out our email newsletter. So we're way ahead of mental floss by about 20 years. Now, their second one on their list was self-cleaning paint. And here is what they said. In 1999, the German building company Stowe released an outdoor paint called Lotus Sand. Now, does that remind you of something? Right. When dried, the paint's micro texture mimics the surface of the lotus leaf to repel moisture and dirt from exteriors. Now, you may have heard of something called the lotus effect, and this is what it is. It's actually a surface micro texture that repels moisture and dirt from exteriors, and in fact, it repels moisture. What it does, it's very, very hydrophobic, right? Super hydrophobic. So it repels water, which means that the water actually forms droplets and then rolls off. And the inspiration for that came from this plant. And one of the things I like to do, just like Craig, whenever I travel around, I always like to visit museums and also botanic gardens, because we're very interested in unusual plants and interesting features of plants, because there are some wonderful examples of design from the plant world, and particularly in botanic gardens where they tend to have more unusual plants. And so this is from a visit to Kew Gardens. Actually, they have lotus plants growing there. They're more of a tropical plant, so they are actually indoors in the tropical glass house. And I'd encourage you to go there. It's a wonderful glass house and has some brilliant examples of the most wonderful design. But anyway, they have lotus plants there which have a water lily-like flower, and they also have these very distinctive seed pods, which are interesting in themselves. Maybe one day we'll talk about those, because that's another example of biomimicry that we can copy and learn from. But the interesting thing here is the leaves. Now, if you look at the leaf next to the seed pod in the middle there, you'll see a few bright spots there. Those are actually water droplets. And if you look very closely at a lotus leaf, see how the water droplets are all sort of standing up away from the surface. The surface repels water and causes it to form these very distinctive spheres, and then they just roll off the leaf, and if there's any dust and dirt and debris on the leaves, it will take them with it. So that self-cleaning effect is actually called the lotus effect, because it was first inspired by lotus leaves. It does happen with other leaves as well. And the reason it does this is because the leaves have this distinctive bumpy surface, and you have to get those bumps exactly the right size and exactly the right distance apart. Because there's another effect called the rose petal effect, and maybe we can look at that at some other time, which also has bumps, but that actually causes the water to stick rather than to roll off. But this is what the German scientists, the German materials scientists, were able to copy, and with their external paint, was this bumpy texture, so that the water droplets would form and then roll off, and you've got a self-cleaning surface. Now, if we go back to the article in Mental Floss, in that first paragraph, they started out by saying, Humans frequently adapt technology found in nature to create our own inventions, a concept called biomimicry. And in their next sentence, they gave thanks to the source of this inspiration. And what did they give thanks to? This is their next sentence. After all, sometimes the best tech is right in front of us, thanks to millions of years of evolution. Now, as Craig and Joseph have just pointed out, time does not create things, time destroys things, or just allows processes to go on and destroy things. Like your fossils will get destroyed if they're left lying around for thousands and millions of years. Things fall to pieces if they're allowed to just sit around for millions of years. Time does not make things. So, in fact, when we see something that is inspired by the natural world, that is because intelligent engineers like the Swiss engineer who invented Velcro observed the natural world, then used his God-given intelligence, his God-given brain to apply that and come up creatively with something based on it. Ultimately, we should be worshipping or giving thanks, because worship is it comes from an old word meaning worthship, right? Acknowledging the worthiness of the one who has done something. So we should be worshipping the Creator who made heaven and earth and all that is in it, whether it's big, small, mundane, and ordinary, or big and spectacular. We should be worshipping the Creator. So